And nice to see you, everybody. And thank you very much for joining us for this webinar about being proactive against advanced attacks. My name is Leon, and I'm the head of corporate training at ThriveDX Enterprise. I come from a background of penetration testing, security assessments, and forensics. And today we'll be talking about proactive defense against advanced attacks, focusing on business email compromise. Leading this webinar with me is the amazing and talented Jason. Jason, a few words about yourself.
Hi, everybody. Nice to see you. Well, try to see everybody. I'm Jason. I'm solutions engineer with ThriveDX. I come from the original Lucy team, 3 years almost now. I build campaigns and help creating deceptive emails. Yeah, that's about me.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Jason. And Jason will be doing some of the technical parts for us today and giving you a real simulation and explanation of how this attack is carried out. So we'll be definitely explaining what business compromise is, but we also want to give you a state understanding of what is happening in the world. The major part of the webinar, of course, will be how to be proactive, and will include an explanation of the attacker's approaches to executing a business email compromise. We'll go over the core components of it, such as cloning a website, registering a fraudulent domain, and faking the sender and CC information. More about it in the next few minutes. But if you stay up until the end, we also have a free lesson for you, waiting in the app, which you can take either as an extension of the current material that we'll be covering, but also there you'll find a few practical examples of business email compromise like scenarios. So starting in, what is business email compromise? I'm pretty sure the names give it away. Well, it has a compromise and business email in it. So as most of you would assume, it's a situation in which an account within my organization was compromised and is now being used to target additional people within the organization. If the previous explanation was too technical, let's try to understand what stands behind it. It's type of an attack where we take and impersonate a person within the organization. It might be a trusted person, such as the CEO, the finance guy, or the HR, whoever is commonly requesting me for assistance or information, or might be an address who needs that data. To put it simply, well, just think of identity theft. If somebody was to impersonate that same CEO or the finance or the HR representatives, this is in fact an attack that relies on manipulation of trust. As I mentioned, it would normally be somebody I would trust, somebody whom I would help, whom I would gladly help. If, for example, some stranger would approach me and ask me for, how are we doing financially, or give me the latest report you had, I wouldn't give it in a blink of an eye. But if it was the CEO saying, like, quickly, urgently, I need this, I likely will do something like that, after I verify, of course. As we'll see, it's not always simple, but it's not always too complex. In some cases, we'll need the attacker to forge email communication, or at least manipulate it, if he believes that he's compromised an account but wants to take it even further and mimic a different account. So it's also a possibility of it. But the most important part, and why we chose to highlight this specific advanced attack, is because it bypasses most security measures. It's not like a traditional phishing email, which comes from outside the organization and can be blocked at the email gateway without filtering extensively because it's simply an outside domain. In this case, we're speaking about an email which seems to come from within, from a trusted organization with whom I already have ongoing conversations, maybe on different topics. So this is what really makes it stand out. And honestly, it's the part that makes it complex. Jason, I know about myself, but would you say no to a request of a CEO or an executive?
Not necessarily. I would definitely say, okay, let's have a look, and then maybe fall for it.
So that's where it gets tricky. And no, we're not suggesting you to say no to your CEO, but we'll cover how to identify it and where you should definitely have some suspicion. So looking at business email compromise, we actually have three main use cases we usually encounter. And this is where we can start analyzing the suspicious behavior. Money is probably the most common attack vector we encounter, where the adversary, after conducting the business email compromise, is requesting us to make a certain transaction or make a certain payment. Unlike a regular phishing attacker, which would ask us to submit credentials, here we see a call to action. It might be like the finance guy messaging us saying, like, we noticed that the latest transaction you tried to do on your credit card did not pass. Please do it to this account instead, where the account submitted is the account of the adversary. Second option is, well, information. What happens with the information we commonly share? Most often we share it with people who are already within the organization. There is no problem with that. They are expected to have access to it. But what if, for some reason, you would receive a request from one of the employees to give him all the details of the expenses or the security controls you have implemented on your computers? Well, this information should normally come from the IT, and you might be the IT who's getting asked. But then there is a question of, well, why are you being asked for this information? Why it is an urgent request? And this is where we can see that some of the things start to stand out. It would normally be a request that is out of context or suspicious. And if we are not requested for documents, the other call of action we might get is to change some settings or access. Business email compromise will not essentially be the end goal in all cases. Sometimes it might just be one method to gaining a better foothold within the organization. It might be that the adversary will impersonate the IT guy saying like, hey, listen, we need to do some maintenance on your computer. Please change this configuration to allow us to log in. And this seems to be a normal communication between colleagues where business email compromise is the corporate behind it all. So we've covered the basic explanation about what business email compromise is, but before going forward, we'd actually want to ask you, how have you ever encountered or experienced business email compromised incidents within your organization? If you have, how common it is, whether you experienced it once or twice, or whether you've seen it multiple times. Meanwhile, I'm answering a question in the chat. How do attackers typically research and target specific individuals for business email compromise? While people are filling in the answers, I'll give the short answer, but we can return it later in the webinar. Normally, attackers would either listen for a specific time to the ongoing communication once they got the initial foothold, waiting for people to send out emails, listening to the traffic on a single station, seeing what communication is being made. And in parallel, they would do some OSINT on the organization, find out who's the CEO, who's the finance guy, who's the HR, in order to impersonate them. So it's a mix of studying the organization from within and OSINT from outside, from the company's LinkedIn profile, from any publications they made, and maybe even resources they managed to scavenge from within the reconnaissance in the organization.
I would like to add a little bit to that, if I can. LinkedIn is a very great tool for scammers to gather information, because typically, as we've mentioned, attackers look for high-profile CEOs, people that control money, accountant. These things can be found on LinkedIn about that person's profile. They then target them. They use social media to find information about them. So every little resource about that person starts usually at LinkedIn, and then they know the name, they know the person, they know the target. That's where they target their person, and then they gather the information however they can and use what we call spear phishing to gather more information.
So we also have most results submitted, and you should see the results on your screen. We actually have about 2/3, a bit more of the participants here encountered it at least once, which I guess why you're here. Luckily, we don't have anybody regularly experiencing it. The reason is because most times doing business email compromise is a bit complex and not so much widespread as regular phishing. For those of you who've never heard of it or aware of others who experienced it, we're glad you're here, and we'll be able to provide you with some insights about how to be proactive in your preparation for an attack that will necessarily come at one point or another. So going forward, I mentioned a lot business email compromise versus phishing, but I really want to do one proper comparison in order for us to have a clear picture. When targeting an individual, in phishing will normally encounter widespread messaging, and anybody who falls, I'll take him as a victim. When we're talking about business email compromise, it's more about selecting that specific CEO, executive, finance, or anybody with special privileges or financial authority. The goal is in business email compromise to take action, to transfer funds, to share files, to get that security down. Whereas in phishing, on the contrary, as I mentioned, it's usually trying to get the credentials or trying to get to the next step. And the methods here are also slightly different, where in phishing, it's mostly about deception and generally tricking the users. In business email compromise, we really try to assume a role. We try to present ourselves as the trusted individual and really engage in maybe ongoing conversation, maybe more than one email, but actually a thread of some. The scale also differs drastically. Phishing can be sent to many recipients, whereas in business email compromise, because I'm using a resource within the organization, it would usually be a one-on-one, and it will be highly personalized, not something that would sound generic, but like a regular communication between two people. And the preventative measures here is also different, because if we said that phishing emails are coming from the outside and we can block them using technology, email gateways, here it's more about how we behave, what we notice, whether we suspect a request coming from an executive or out of context, and operationally, whether we have a separation of duties, whether I can, indeed being compromised, make a transfer without anybody reviewing it. So those are main and key differences to keep in mind, and why we think it requires to give its own spotlight as to other phishing attacks. But not to speak only of definitions, we also need to understand what's actually happening out there. And we said that most of us encountered it at least once. Some of us encountered it more. I personally like reading the news. I do it every day, and there's always a fresh sense of disappointment in the morning when you see the new cybersecurity headline. And business email compromise tends to come a few days a week. but I've gathered some of the highlights. Actually, before going into that, Jason, you're more in the field. Have you heard about something interesting recently?
Well, something not recently, but something that stood out for me. The point what I'm trying to make here, why something a little bit further back, 2013, actually. There was a BEC crew, typically gangsters that mimic companies, that pretend to be somebody else, and typically do like business email compromise. And they've spoofed a company in Taiwan, I think it was Quanta Computers or something like that, and they were suppliers to two big tech giants, Facebook and Google. And they hit Google in 2013 with a $23 million invoices, which Google then paid, pretending to be this company. And then Facebook later that year, 99 million. However, before they got to laundering, because laundering is a big part of this whole BEC and getting money because they have to get money mules and so on, the giants, Google and Facebook, actually detected, contacted the FBI straight away, and they were then returned their money. This person was caught, got something like 114 months prison time. But it's a very so that just goes to show you, even the big guys get caught in these situations, you know.
Yeah, a partner being recent, I remember those cases, and it's a ridiculous amount of money. And speaking about the FBI, we'll mention it as well. I've seen some other noteworthy news article, like with generative AI, people are now combining wormable AIs that create business email compromise attacks, and it's just like the stuff of your nightmares. But it usually resolves around like they trying to get that money. So I've gathered a few researches that really emphasize what is happening right now in the world. So we have different vendors who deal with email security who publish those, and they've actually noticed a rise in people reporting business email compromise. So first of all, it's excellent that they're reporting them, but it mainly drives through the understanding that we had a general increase in phishing. So the result of those phishing attacks was some accounts compromised. Now that those accounts are compromised, attackers are able to take the next step and start those internal communication. So what they do is they compromise one account from the outside, and then they use this account in order to leverage and perform some sort of a lateral movement using business email compromise. The numbers we've seen is an increase of about 1/3, like not 1/3, threefold, it's actually 30% in business email compromise attacks. And it's not that they necessarily have to compromise the CEO right away. We'll see that some of the email parameters can be manipulated. So if any account is compromised, it will pose a danger. Speaking about big companies, we also have some reports from Microsoft. Microsoft did some numbers as well as FI, and they've noticed that they suspected about 150,000 emails of business email compromise daily through their security measures. It sums up to 35 million emails a year. Now, I did some math of my own, and if a single person had to read each and every one of those business email compromise letters, it would take him more than 2 lifetimes, just so you have a number. And those are really concerning numbers, but good that it's worldwide and not with a specific target. But we've spoken about the FBI, and the FBI paint us a clear picture regarding what are the costs of those things. And this is a report taken from the FBI from the year 2022 that actually addresses numbers they measured in 2021. So just 2 years ago, they've seen an increase from 360 million at the average cost of business email compromise to, I can say with a straight face, freaking 2.4 billion losses, potential losses in money that has been transferred for business email compromise attacks. And well, this is a huge deal, and this is actually happening everywhere. Some other statistics not here speak about 2/3 of business email compromise, and especially phishing, being specific to the US. But in terms of growth over time, Japan has seen an increase of about 100%, the UK in about 300%, and I think that Canada has seen the most, which was about 800% increase in business email compromise specifically. Again, crazy numbers. And while dealing with the loss of 2.4 billion is something catastrophic, we can actually be proactive. We can take necessary precautions in order to get into a more secure state of mind, that even if such an attack was to bypass our security measures, in terms of how we are prepared, in terms of how our employees perceive those emails, we can do a bit better by simply being proactive. So let's get to the more interesting-ish part. So just before I pass the stage to Jason and he goes into further explanation, just to sum up a few key points that we've discussed that will give the context to how to be proactive. So what we need to remember is that attackers are usually compromising email accounts, and if they didn't manage to compromise one, they may even spoof one with a similar domain. They usually will be impersonating high-ranking people. And if they didn't compromise a high-ranking account, they can actually manipulate some of the email communication headers in order to make it seem like to come from one. And they will be using look-aligned domains for that, meaning a domain that spells Adidas instead of Adidas or anything like that. Two additional characteristics which we might pay attention to is the request for secrecy. Because this is a one-on-one communication, they don't want you to approach the actual person, so they will request you to keep it a secret, and will likely try to resolve it as fast as possible, saying that you need to do it quickly or that this is an emergency. So this is pretty sure, I'm pretty sure is enough as to how things look in the background. Jason, do you want to give us a hands-on example of what it's like?
Yeah, so definitely going to be showing you guys a little bit of what to expect, how to prepare for something like this. Quick video, it's going to be about 3 minutes. I want to talk about how to create a attack simulation when it comes to business compromise. This is a quick video. I mean, you shouldn't really need to follow. You should just see how quick and easy it is to build a campaign with our tool, which kind of requests credentials, looking like it's somebody from within the company and there's somebody attached to it that you might find familiar, and you then go ahead and then, you know, give access to that person that requested. So without further ado, I'm going to quickly open that up. I'm going to start that, and then after that I will go a little bit into deeper information about this, how it works, what I've done there, the 3 little aspects, which is website cloning and fake CC, and so on and so forth. So let me go ahead and press play. See you on the other side. Right. Thanks for holding there. I see some comments that it is a bit fast. Yes, I agree, it is a bit fast. The point of this was not to show the process here. It's actually just to give you an idea how quickly somebody can create a business compromise email by cloning, copying, creating domains, adding face CC into it. This all in all took me 5 minutes to create in total, registering the domain, creating the email, and changing it up. So let's quickly break that down into smaller bits. Cloning the website. So quickly, the tool gives us the option to quickly do a cloning of the website. You find your designated web page, you click on copy the page, as you can see in the example, and you can go ahead and copy each page. What I've done in this was to copy the WHO World Health Organization page, and I added a login page there. This is a great way to get a framework of the website, so that you can either put in a script that whichever desired information you want, maybe a login data that you want, asking the client to or the user to add in their company data, to log into the system to give us access, which means that I can just copy that information, got it, and then I can quickly go and change his password or get access to where I need to get access. Or obviously, there's another way of doing this, is to gain information from somebody. You're not really the person I want to attack. However, I want to know who your superior is, and you could actually create a website which gives feedback like a job portal or job satisfaction portal, and it states in there who's your manager, for example. That's information that you skim off from creating pages like this. Yeah, contact sheets to gain access to people with higher access. In this case, I've added the whole message of this, or the whole attack that I've done here, was based on gaining access from this user, because I need to get their credentials to do certain compromises. I can give you some examples of how we used some of these cloning. I had a bank in Switzerland, not going to name any names. They had 5 executives. We needed to clone the web page. We added these. We added the web page, we added the users, the 5 executives, and we actually had the page exactly the way the bank's page would be, and we asked them to enter their password and username. 4 out of them actually did it. We could see their passwords. So there were two reasons why we did this: to see what kind of passwords they use, and secondly, to see if they can identify this was it was a very difficult campaign. However, it was very stressful because it was very sensitive data. But again, it shows you the power of cloning a website very quickly, creating something. The next step that I did was to actually grab the domain name. As we can see here, it says domain-example. There are 2 or 3 ways that using the tool, you can generate the domain. You don't even need to use the tool through the API generate. You can use your own provider, which then Lucy has the option to add that domain. But when choosing a domain, how do we choose a domain? In my case, I chose something that could present the World Health Organization. So they had WHO.international. Mine was WHO-group.de, for example. So it doesn't really need to always be exactly the same way, because sometimes the domain is not available. In this case, it looks very compelling, very good chance that somebody clicks on. So I created that domain so that I can use it for this attack. However, you don't always use a domain in this case that specifically fits the theme. You could use something a little bit more generic, like API.support or API-support.com. You have a couple of options there, but making an email difficult, especially when you're cloning it, you want to get a domain that you can register that is very close to the actual attack. And then of course, we have a cert bot, which then generates an SSL for that certificate so that we don't get the red screen of death. I mean, that's my term. You know, when you click on a website, it doesn't have an SSL, you then get this red screen says, hey, this is not safe, because you might be vulnerable to man-in-the-middle attack, or the information encryption is not correct, is not good enough. Therefore, with the CAB form stating that you need to have an SSL in your web pages. So we have an SSL for every domain that you've created, as long as we have you've created it in your own DNS provider or in the API tool. You can then make sure that the A records are in place, and then the SSL can be generated. And then last but not least, fake CCs and sender emails. As you can see on the picture on the right side, no reply, lucky Sasha.xyz. This is just an example of a domain. What this is trying to point out is you can add any domain you'd like when you're creating this attack. Now, you can use any domain to send the attack. You can get whatever domains you can get your hands on. You don't need to necessarily register the domain that you send it off. As in my example, my domain was a WHO group, but my attack was actually mycompany.com, where the email sent from. This is obviously some whitelisting and so on and so forth, because we're not testing the actual infrastructure, we're testing the user. And therefore we could put any domain in there, and then we see there at the bottom there's fake CC. So we would add somebody that the user is obviously we have the information of the user that we are targeting, so we add somebody in there that person trusts. So when the person gets that email, he sees, hey, oh, Stephen's also got that. Oh, Stephen was emailed in it. And in this case, Stephen was the person that actually requested in my email example, please to assist. Stephen mentioned that you can assist me gaining access to this portal. Please log in with your credentials and give me access. So just with that 5 minutes or 6 minutes, I cloned a page. I registered the domain. I prepared an email with the correct credentials, fake CC, to make this way more believable. As Leon mentioned, the more you have somebody that you trust in the company, in an email or something that looks familiar, the more you are likely to click on it, because you go, hey, this is somebody that is mentioned in this email, and therefore my guard is down a little bit, and I would click on an email. Yeah, thank you very much, Leon. This is back to you.
So just to iterate a bit and give background to tie to some questions that were popped in the chat. So we said we want to understand how to be proactive. While we use our tools to do this demonstration because it allows us to do all within one system instead of showing you multiples, it's the concept that matters. So as to what are business email compromise attack, we discussed it and we understood that those are impersonations that rely on trust in order to make us perform action. We discussed that business email compromise are different from phishing because they would normally not ask for credentials, but they would ask for action. But this does not mean we can't use the same context for training. As Jason showed, in this example, he did ask for credentials, but what he was testing is, would the user perform an action such as reset somebody else's account? While we cannot actually recommend you to try and trick your employees into spending or transferring money, you could use site cloning to replicate your payment portal and simply instruct them like, please log into the payment portal and do the transfer font, where they'll actually fall at the login stage. But the intention to perform the action is what will point out where you have the gaps that you need to pay close attention to. The state of business email compromise is definitely alarming, and we recommend you take those steps to practice it. And practice will need to be tailored to your organization. Instead of Steve, who Jason used, you'll need to use some names from your organization. You'll need to use a domain name which is similar to your own, or even use your actual domain in case you want to. You can use your own domain, your own email server, and use any system capable of sending phishing emails while using the domain such as ours, and simply incorporate a business email compromise scenario into the attack. Most built-in scenarios would ask just for the credentials, but with a quick switch of, can you activate this account, or can you log into our platform? And this is the reason why we use site cloning, not to send you to some third-party site, but so you can actually take your sites and replicate them easily. And this is also actually how you are proactive, by simulating an attack. Not an attack that, as I said, requests the employee to transfer funds or actually change any of the security configuration. What you might actually want to do is to ask them to reply to those emails. And some systems such as ours are capable of intercepting those replies and also viewing this as an indicator of compromise. If the user is asked to reply or share some information and he engages in a conversation, this is a step where it could be stopped. And while some of you may say, like, it's okay if he engages but does not transfer anything, keep in mind that attackers could be very persuasive, even more than your local Schuster sales guy, which will get you to buy this new pair of sneakers. Don't engage. Don't engage, be prepared ahead. And even if it's not 100% business email compromise asking you to transfer $2.4 billion, there are traits of behavior which can be identified and stopped up ahead. And a moment before we finalize and we go to the Q&A questions, you know what? I'll leave that for that, but Jason, let's skip to the Q&A and then we'll give on the promised lesson.
Let's do that then, indeed.
So hopefully we've provided you with an understanding of what business email compromise is, what are the main scenarios, and a few ideas of how can you simulate it, and an understanding that all in all, it should be pretty easy. But we'd like to hear if you have any questions or things you'd like us to clarify, or perhaps explore more in depth. there were a few questions we tried to do back and forth. So the question was, how can companies perform regular assessments for simulations to test their employees and recognize business email compromise? I'll repeat the explanation again. It's simply to incorporate business email compromise like scenarios. Instead of using a fraudulent example of Amazon or Google, replicate an internal domain, instruct the users to take some action, ask the user to reply rather than submit credentials, and check whether the user is doing it or whether he approaches that person. For example, a suggestion I could definitely make is if you're doing a simulation where you're assuming to be the CEO or the finance, go to them beforehand and let them know we're going to use you as an example. Please update us if people approach you, if they double check. And if they don't, then maybe even despite they not clicking the link or not performing the action, you will still have an understanding of a precaution you need to make and instruct employees to go and verify suspicious activity, suspicious requests, or out of context requests. But for those of you who stayed with us, Jason, if we might have the next slide, we do want to give you an extra piece of content because we said that there might be a bunch of different scenarios which you can explore. One which we would recommend you explore is actually tied to another issue that is a concern for some people from recently. Google has approved a bunch of new top-level domains. Among them is the .zip domain. While it will not concern some, it does allow for a new vector of attacks where employees might receive emails that are ending with a zip domain instead of a .com or .net or .org or any other that was available before. So now we have a bunch of new attack vectors where, for example, an attacker may create a site that looks like a file explorer, label it as your important directory.zip or your important file.zip, and say that this is something you need to click. One of the examples that we're seeing in the wild is attackers mimicking file archivers and sharing them such as, well, this is the latest photo collection from your HR. And you can use this in combination with a business email compromise scenario, saying like, this is the latest file sharing from HR. Please go in, download the files, which might be malware, or unlock the file using your password, which will be credential left, or reply to us to tell us what you think about your pictures. And this lesson we're sharing with you contains all of this information. This lesson will be available for the next month. You can scan the QR. It will also be available in the recording. Feel free to explore the extra content. We hope it will be useful for you and will provide you with either ideas for things you can standalone test in your campaigns, or if you want to combine it with a business email compromise scenario and see how it works for you and whether it assists you to make your users engage with a more secure behavior. And lately, if you're also a user of our platform, you'll also have a pre-made campaign for the zip domain. We encourage you to look it up. And once again, thank you everybody for joining this webinar. We'll stay for a few more minutes if there's any last moment questions, but we hope you enjoyed it. I definitely enjoyed the demo JSON and especially the trending music, but actually it wasn't. For those of you who really want to go through the video, you can, all the steps, there are actual steps taken through the system. You can slow it down a bit or focus on individual's frame. And also feel free to read through the email. It's a real persuasive one. Congrats to the attacker. That would be all. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much. That was fun. Have a wonderful day. Till next time.
Till next time.